Achievement Award.
Yes, please welcome Bob George of Esterline up onto the stage. Wow. After almost 2 decades as Chief Financial Officer, Bob retired from Bellevue-based Esterline in August. 2 months later, the $4 billion sale of Esterline to TransDigm was announced. Now, Bob doesn't know this, but I have a special letter to read. This was sent to us from Bob Kremen, the former chairman and CEO of Esterline, who really wanted to be here today, but he couldn't. But he sent us this note, so I'm going to read Bob's note. Bob's title of CFO never communicated his real impact on the growth and evolution of Esterline. Bob was a key contributor to the strategy that led to Esterline growing by 4 times, by 4 times. There's been somewhere over 30 acquisitions that were successfully completed thanks to him, but he did a lot more. He lined up the financing, did on-site due diligence, helped sell the acquisition concept to the board of directors. Bob and his team had to make sure that each acquisition was properly integrated into the company. Next, the investment technology concept had to make sense to the investing public. Bob had to make sure that any communications were accurate and understood financially. Wall Street analysts knew that if Bob made a claim, that it was backed up by facts and a lot of due diligence research. Bob made things look easy. One reason he was so successful is that he built a really great team. Finance was populated by people who liked working for Bob and who learned from a pro. The CEO and the board knew that matters were in good hands if Bob said so. He had many years of great decision-making to back up his reputation. He was one of the key reasons why the stock price of Esterline went from $3 a share in its early days to the current figure of about $120. He was a pleasure to work with and highly respected by his team. What a great note.
Here's a note for you. So what you would also want to know is that this most special leadership award goes to a person who has very strong ties to and in the Puget Sound region, who has dedicated his whole career to financial excellence. And we are so grateful that he flew all the way in from Hawaii for this award. He was on vacation, left his family and flew all the way for this, and I'm sure he'll be headed out to warm climes as soon as this is over. So big round of applause for this remarkable honoree, Bob George.
I wish Kremen were here right now so I could do something to him in response.
He's miles away.
I know where he is. Actually, first of all, I'd like to thank the Puget Sound Business Journal and the selection committee for this honor. It's a great honor, and I'm truly appreciative. Second, I'd like to congratulate all the CFO of the Year award winners. I was up here on the stage, and I can't believe it was that long ago. It was 2007. And at that point in time, I think Esterline we had grown from about $150 million to just under $1 billion. And I think about the years that have happened after that. So, you know, the other thing I'd like to say is this is a Lifetime Achievement Award winner. I'd like to think I have a little bit more runway left. But then, as Emily mentioned, this is a team sport we play. And there's a number of us who have been up here honored individually, but there are a lot of thanks. And first of all, I have to thank my team. Kremen mentioned it in his note. I'm an athlete. I've been an athlete most of my life. I've not done any Ironmans. Mostly team sports. My team at Esterline is the greatest collection of friends and professionals that I've ever had the privilege to work with, and I owe them a tremendous amount of thanks. But along with that, the CFOs who have been up here and those of you in the audience, there is a very, very significant group of outside individuals that add our success. Everyone from investment bankers, commercial bankers, public accountants, real estate professionals, and others. And a number of those individuals that have worked with me over the last 20 some odd years are here, and they deserve a great amount of my appreciation and thanks. And then, of course, my family. So my wife of 40 years, who made me come today, she said, look, you've done a lot worse things in a plane than fly from Hawaii to Seattle and then back again, like some of those trips you made to Europe back and forth. And you have to be there. And then my 2 kids. Without them, I mean, they are the foundation and the support of everything. When I was being interviewed by Puget Sound Business Journal, Coral Gornick asked me a question that has already been asked by one other tonight, and that is, she said, what do you think the #1 objective for all CFOs should be? Now, that's an impossible question to answer, because every situation is different. But I have 2 small vignettes that I'd like to relay that kind of frame the way I think about this position. I've had a tremendous number of mentors over the years who have been willing to take the time with an oftentimes impertinent person in front of them to guide me, course correct, sometimes scold me. And these 2 situations remind me. So I was a young person. I was the finance, planning, and analysis manager at a small manufacturing company, and I was sitting in front of the chief operations officer's desk, and we were talking about a very large capital expenditure for this relatively small company. And Ed Anick was his name, and he was, my way of looking at it back then, he was an older, crusty, some might say cranky guy. He was probably a lot younger and a lot less cranky than I am. And he was supporting this project tremendously, and I could not make the numbers work. So after we've exchanged views for a while, Ed stood up from behind his desk, put his hands on the desk, leaned over the desk, looked me in the eye, and he said, "This is the problem with you bean counters." He said, "You would rather be precisely wrong than approximately correct." And then he walked around his desk, turned out the lights, shut the door, and left me sitting there in the dark. Now, I have to tell you, so this was probably close to, 30 some years ago. And I still remember that as if it were yesterday. And so I sat there for, honestly, I sat there for a long time thinking about what he said, contemplated the wisdom of his words. And from that day on, Ed and I became great friends, and I became known as an operations-oriented CFO. And I walked the floor when I was in manufacturing companies. I walked the job sites when I was in construction. I was in built power plants for a period of time. And I like to think that I knew Esterline better than almost anyone in the corporation. The second story occurred a couple years later. I had just been appointed chief financial officer of this small manufacturing company, and a friend of mine, who was a public company CFO of a much larger company, asked me out to lunch to celebrate. And of course I accepted. His name was Bill Freeman, and we're sitting there, and after ordering, he said, "So Bob, you know what this means, don't you?" Now, I had no idea what he was talking about, and I said so. I said, "Bill, I don't know." He said, "From now on, Bob, every day, people are going to be watching you. They're going to watch where you park, when you come in, when you leave, whether you're smiling, whether you're frowning, whether you say good morning, And the reason they're going to be watching is because they know you know. And from that, they are going to begin to infer what's going on and make assumptions based on watching you every day. And I sat there again, very young, first CFO title, and I then began to recognize what exactly the title Chief Financial Officer meant and the weight that comes with that responsibility. And I've had many other opportunities over the years, but those two events framed the way that I have tried to carry myself and present myself in every organization I've been in. And getting back to Coral's question to me, I think that sums up the responsibilities of a CFO, to have the moral courage and the intellectual integrity to make the best decisions for a company and its stakeholders all the time. And thank you all very much.
Bob George, winner of Puget Sound Business Journal's Lifetime Achievement Award.
Yes, thank you so much, Bob. And it's wonderful to have all of our honorees here today. Let's hear a big round of applause one more time for all of this year's CFOs.
We're asking you to all stay up here with us, Bob. We're asking all of you to please make your way up here on the stage. Bob, just come on back.
Bob, you can come back. Ann Brannon of Nordstrom, please come on up.
Oh, okay. All right, Melba Bartels, VECU, come on right up on the stage so you can get your due. Come on, everybody.
And Bob Barton from Mod Pizza, please join us.
Venkat Vamadapati, Providence St. Joseph Hill, come on up.
Ellen Boyer.